All right, you are listening to the Maker's Quest podcast. I'm Brian Benham.
And I am Greg Porter. And today we're going to talk about having interns or new employees starting and working under you and how some of that starts to come together and what that looks like. A lot of us work alone in our shops, and we are a business of one. The maker seller doer model is, as a lot of the financial books like to talk about it. But at some point, when our businesses grow to a certain spot, we've got to hire our first employee, or we've got to take on an intern or an apprentice or someone like that. And we thought that might be interesting to talk about our experiences, maybe me more so from the corporate side. And Brian, right now, I understand you have an intern or an apprentice working with you kind of for the first time. Is this your apprentice's first job within the carpentry field?
Yeah, so to set the stage, I met this kid through my daughter's friends group. He showed an interest in what I do and wanted to learn more. And he's a student, so he's not anywhere near full time. He works with me only a couple of days a month, just because with his schooling, and he's very active in after school activities and things. So that's just kind of sets the stage of where we're at. But I was like, yeah, I'll pay you a little bit of money to come and help me a few days a month. And the first day, I realized very quickly that I was not going to get much done myself. That there's just a lot of things, and also a lot of the anxiety of making sure no one gets hurt. Right? We're in a shop where things are spinning and can remove flesh very quickly. So there was some safety. I realized, like, okay, I need to make sure before I let him use any tool that I kind of give him a basic safety rundown. And one of those things, we're drilling a lot of holes, and I wanted to set up a stop on the drill press so we could very quickly drill each hole on the next part. And I realized that this is probably the first time this kid has held a crescent wrench. In my shop, I don't have any of those fancy plastic flip up stops that you see all the YouTuber guys showing off in their YouTube videos. My shop is very old school, so I have a bar clamped to the fence of, or the clamp to the table of the drill press, with a little thing that I've manufactured that slides on that bar, and then a nut that tightens it down, and you basically bump your work up to a little tab that I've welded onto this thing that slides back and forth. And so I was showing him how to set up the stop. And then after he drilled all the holes in the first setting, we needed to move the stop to drill the holes in the next setting. So I'm like, all right, we'll go ahead and move the stop. And so I handed him the wrench, and it took him like a few seconds to realize, okay, it's a crescent wrench, so I got to turn this thing in the middle. And then watching him try to arrange it so it's missing the little tab that I welded on. It's like, no, dude, you got to turn it over so you got room to turn it, right? Like, and I don't want to be like insulting and be like, no, dummy, you don't know how to use a crescent wrench. What's wrong with you? Because this is probably the first time he's ever used one.
Yeah.
He's probably grown up in a situation where he's, grown up in an apartment where he's never had to use anything like that before. So yeah, so I just had to like check my patience and kind of step back and be like, okay, I need to be teacher Brian now, not like we're making money Brian now. And then once he gets going, because we had a shit ton of holes to drill. So once he gets going, then I just need to just check in on him. But for the first little bit, I was definitely very hands-on, just teaching him how to use the tools and kind of trying to encourage him, like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. Like, that can happen. We can fix it this way or whatever.
Well, so I guess one of my questions would be kind of the chicken and egg, right? So you've got a thing to build. I don't know what your overall project was. So did you set up his schedule based on the work that you had to do, and you knew, hey, on Wednesday, I know I'm going to be drilling 10,000 holes. That'd be the day to have my apprentice come by, would be the day I'm drilling holes versus, on Monday, I'm milling a bunch of lumber and using the table saw all day, and it may not work out to have him help me there. So were you setting up the days that he was going to show up based on what you had to do, or are you doing things on the days he's going to show up and saving those things back for him?
Yeah, so I knew that for his schooling and things, that he would be available Friday afternoon, Saturday. Um, And then Sunday he had some other band commitment. So I only knew I had him Friday afternoon and all of Saturday. So I set it up to work with him on this project on Saturday and held back those parts till Saturday and worked on other things, which isn't that big of a deal for me because I usually have multiple projects going on and I'm one person and can only work on one thing at a time.
Yeah. And did this young man have any shop classes or any exposure to anything like this in school, or is he coming in just completely green?
Completely green. They don't even have a shop class in the high school that he goes to.
Oh
It's
wow.
not even in existence. There's no maker classes, no nothing. And the environment he grew up in, like I said, it's like he has no need or even ability to have any kind of tools, you know. So this was totally green, like his first experience of using tools of any kind.
The lefty loosey, righty tighty
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah,
happened.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and again, kind of giggling a little bit, but it's not to be disparaging. It's like we all started there. At some point, we didn't know which way the screw turned to tighten and loosen, and had to learn that lesson. A lot of us learned it from our dads, probably, or an uncle or grandpa or somebody like that. So, kind of interesting. My other question would be, obviously, he would have had some desire to do woodworking or some desire to build things or design things or something to come to you and say, hey, I want to be an apprentice or help you do stuff in your shop. What was it that he shared with you that brought him your way?
Well, he wanted to build a thing for his girlfriend. So he wanted help with that as well. So I hooked him up with that too.
Okay, so he
So
had a
his
project in
he had a
mind.
project in mind that he wanted to build. It was one of those bathtub things, so a board that sits on the bathtub, and he wanted to carve out a couple of things and a little slot for the cell phone. And I thought, hey, that's a pretty good first hands on project.
Yeah,
Quick a quick learning thing. So we worked on that together and some of his after school time since then. But yeah.
gotcha. And I'm guessing that project is done. Did it come out all right?
Yeah, it came out fine. There are a couple of design things that we didn't talk about because I just kind of let him go with the design and showed him, how to carve it out. And he wanted to do a lot of it with chisel work. So
Oh boy.
I think that really made him realize the importance of a router because there was a lot of sanding and scraping. But I showed him, cabinet scraper and chisels and things to carve out the dishes for whatever he had imagined that was going to go in these little divots and
Yeah.
and things. But the cell phone holder, there's a slot for the cell phone holder, and then there's a piece of wood that the cell phone holder would go up against. And so he had ingrain glued to the long grain. So I'm pretty sure that's going to snap off pretty quickly. But I told him if that happens, we can put some dowels in there and solve that problem.
Yeah. Well, those are good lessons to learn too. Like we
Yeah.
all have to go through that first piece that cracks because you did something incorrectly and didn't understand how wood moves over time.
Right. And if you've never been exposed to it before, you have no idea that ingrain isn't gonna hold glue well. So
Yeah. Well, and the good news is that it's a bath accessory, so it'll see plenty of humidity
right, it'll
and
be expanding,
opportunity to
contracting all over the
swell
place.
and grow.
Yeah.
Well, so let's see. So he came to you with a project that he wanted to do, and then did it just kind of grow from there? Hey, I want to do this project, and now that I'm done with this project, I'd like to help you in other ways. Or did he start with, I want to do this project, and when we're done with it, maybe see if there's another opportunity?
Well, he started out with he'd like to do the project, and then he wanted to work with me. He says, "Hey, if you ever need any help, let me know. I'd love to continue on." And so then, as at first when he said that, I was like, "Well, yeah, I don't, I'm working by myself. I don't really need any help or desire to have some kid working with me." But then as I thought about it, I realized like I want to grow my business. And today was a perfect example. I didn't go out in the shop at all. I've sat at my desk drawing a design for a new client today. So while I got paid a design fees are designed just to lock the client in so they don't leave. They're not like making huge profits like when I'm out in the shop making stuff.
Yeah.
So, if the saw blade ain't turning, you ain't earning is kind of the saying, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
so today was a minimum money maker day because I spent drawing a new design where if I had someone out in the shop working on some stuff, then there's two of us making money, ideally.
Yeah.
So then I told him, yeah, okay, I'll see if I can, start you out with something easy projects, something that's, beginner friendly. And so we needed to make a bunch of steel frames for a project. So that's what he started on.
Wow. Starting him out on an easy one, drilling a bunch of steel.
Yeah. And then he helped me deliver some stuff. And that was like a really long day of riding awkwardly with me in the car or in the truck for a 2 hour drive to go deliver stuff. So
Was this the big piece of furniture that wouldn't fit in the elevator?
yes.
Okay. I won't ask any more details about that. I
We
know
got it
that.
in the elevator, but yeah, we had like an eighth of an inch to spare, and it was a public venue. Well, it was Red Rocks.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
no reason to keep that a secret. It was Red Rocks. They asked me to come back and do some more work for them after the restaurant, and I couldn't get the table in the elevator, or we jacked up the flow of traffic for a little while trying to figure out how to get the table in and out of the elevator. Yeah.
I would have been impressed if you had called the elevator to go below the floor level and you actually loaded it on the roof of the elevator to ride down. I know in the big construction world, they have to do that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. When I worked for a commercial flooring company, we had the carpet delivered before all the windows went in. And so before they tore down the big crane, and so they craned it through a window and then they put the final window in.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good fun war stories there. We did it was early in my career. I did a medical center, design for a medical center. And one of the things that they had in the basement was an MRI. And if you haven't seen an MRI in pieces and parts, it's one of the coolest things you'll ever see because there's a magnet that weighs like 5 tons or something like that. They're enormous, right? That thing that you go into during an MRI is just a huge magnet.
Hmm.
And they have to roll those in. So the floor has to be structural wherever that thing has to roll. And we designed the building with an MRI suite in the basement, and the magnet came in, just off the truck across a bunch of concrete, no big deal. And about 3/4 of the way through construction, one of the tenants decided they wanted an MRI too, and they were up on, I think, the third floor. And so we had to actually uh, put additional structural columns under where the path of where the magnet was going to roll to get into position. We had to add structural columns to the building, and then they craned that magnet through one of the windows. It was cool just to
Yeah.
see, a heavy chunk of iron like that had to have so much planning ahead of it going in. Anyway, sorry, I'm way off topic
Yeah, no,
with
that's all
MRI
right. That's
magnets, but
another important lesson that we could probably do a whole podcast on. Elevators that's not my first issue with the
oh
elevator.
yeah.
I've measured an elevator and thought, yeah, this will fit. And then found out later that the property management company that owns the building requires that we give them notification that we're delivering a piece of furniture and they put pads up. Now it doesn't fit because of the pads.
Yep. Yeah. The ceilings come out of elevators too.
Yeah.
That's another trick that I've seen some people use where they've got a bunch of 12-foot pieces of material. They just pop a hole in the ceiling in the elevator and stick it through there. Um,
Yeah.
there's all kinds of little tricks, but there a lot of material rides atop the elevator, and you can actually force the doors open and do all kinds of crazy stuff when you're not using the buttons that the public sees.
Yeah.
You can control those things in
Very
all kinds
cool.
of crazy ways.
Yeah.
But anyway, so kind of back to our intern thing. So have you talked to this young man about maybe how long he wants to work for you, or kind of what his commitment level is, or is this relationship kind of just in its infancy and see if he even likes woodworking to begin with.
Yeah, he would like to work more often when he has time between schools, and we've talked about possibly summer. Um, the thing is, I know when people say intern, some interns are
Yeah.
paid interns and some interns are not paid interns. My brother now is a producer for a major news outlet. When he first started, he was an unpaid intern and they totally took advantage of him, working him 15 hours a day. So it's important to me from an ethical standpoint that I pay him something.
Yeah.
So how much work he has will be determined really by what I have going on and what I can afford to pay him.
Yeah. Yeah, for certain. Well, I mean, I think the interesting thing, again, kind of going back to our general audience, is in the DIY space and the maker space. I believe there might be people from other other hobbies or outlooks that listen to the podcast, but kind of thinking about how you can bracket yourself around a person that can help you a day a week or 2 days a week, but not really be that full-time employee is kind of an interesting proposition. Because I think you said earlier when we were talking before we hit record that, planning for or watching over them as they work can take you just as much time as doing the work yourself. So what you're doing is you're investing in this young person, hoping that the time you put in today is going to be valuable and worth some money, uh, revenue, whatever you want to call it, at a later date.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did see that in the same day. So when we first set up the drill press and I showed him how to use the stop, and then I we laid them all out so that way he would know where they all were, or at least the first one of each type we laid out, because once you have your stop set up, you don't need to lay out each one. That's the whole purpose of the stop. And then once we drilled through the first one and I showed him how to set up the stop, from then on he was able to just go without me having just to stand over him, and I just kind of checked in every once in a while as I was working. And that's also another issue in my shop, is that my shop is only between the two buildings is 1,000 square feet. So there are several instances where I wanted to use a sandblaster, but the sandblaster door and the bar that was going across the drill press were taking up the same airspace. So I had to wait for him to finish drilling the holes to unclamp so I could throw some stuff into the sandblasting cabinet. But yeah, so it's just, I need a bigger shop too.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm right there with you. I had a I had a coworker in the shop a few weeks ago, just helping him make some shelves. He's doing some floating shelves in his house. And when he came over, I said, I just want you to know this shop was built for one person operations and it's not built for two. So we're going to be all over each other the entire time that you're in here working beside me, but it's going to be okay. And I also had to share with him that my shop is not built for 8 foot sheet goods. It's built for 4 foot. So everything that was long, we had to cut outside and then bring it in. So kind of fun.
Yeah, when I worked bridge construction company to solve part of they had a big shop, but to help solve some of the size and space and passing big beams through, they had the saw set up so that it was set up next to the wall. So you open this hatch on the wall, and then they have these roller bars that went outside, and then you rolled the beam in through this hatch across the saw and cut it up.
Yeah, it's always nice to bring your material in smaller bits rather than larger bits, because
Yeah.
the larger bits have to get stored all in one piece. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's turn this around now and talk about like in the architectural world, what it's like being an intern or hiring an intern in a more of a commercial environment.
Yeah. We've kind of got three levels of interns that we deal with, and we now refer to some as interns, but some as we use the title emerging professionals. And it just kind of all depends on where they're at in life. Here in Colorado, there's a school district that's nearby that has an architecture program for their juniors and seniors in high school, which is almost unheard of. Like there are drafting classes and other things of that nature that you see every once in a while, but you rarely see an architecture program in a high school. And they're learning how to design things. They're learning how to use some of the same software that we use, both SketchUp, Revit, and I think they're actually using Rhino as well, which is really cool. And our high school kiddos that join us, we refer to them as interns because they're not emerging professionals yet. They're not seeking a professional degree, and they come in with a few classes of background, but really we cannot allow them to operate in any way, shape, or form on a real project. Way too much liability there.
Yeah.
And you know how those things go. So we set up programs for our high school interns, and we essentially allow them to define a design problem that they want to solve. We've had everything from designing the laboratory bay in a spaceship. So a space shuttle, here's the laboratory bay, that how it's going to lay out, what pieces it's going to have, where's the testing area, where's the sleeping berth, where's the dining area, whatever it is. We've had one of our high school interns wanted to redesign her bedroom. So she spent a semester learning how to model her bed. She was not an architecture student. She was just interested in design of some type. And so she learned how to use SketchUp and built her house, and then the house that she lives in, and then built her bedroom, and then built all the furniture that goes in her bedroom. And then kind of the last step of that was, how many different ways can I arrange this furniture and which is the best? And then now we have had a couple architecture students here recently. One paralleled a project that we were doing. So we just took a chunk of a project. So it was a renovation on a charter school's, what do they call it? It was a homeschool extension program. So there's a group of homeschool students that need to do science labs and other things that they generally aren't equipped to do at home. So they come in one day a week. There's kind of a rotating group, right? There's a group that comes on Fridays. There's a group that comes on Thursdays. There's a group who comes on Wednesdays, and they rotate in. So our intern got to take a laboratory and some administrative space, make a conference room, a whole admin area for the receptionist and things like that, and then one of the lab spaces, and design that. And again, it was in parallel to the quote unquote real project. She was using the same software, same parameters, but unfortunately her design wasn't being used in real life. But she got to do the same things we were doing. So she paralleled our schedule and then our deliverables and everything like that. That was really kind of a cool experience, I think, for that student. And we have one currently who's designing something completely different. She's just got her program that she's designing for, and then we have a couple architects that take turns meeting with her and giving her ideas about where to explore. So that's the group of high school interns and what they do. But then we also take on college, usually third, fourth, fifth year design students, and it's usually closer to fourth and fifth year design students that we take on, and they have got enough school under their belt that they understand the design process and they can actually be of help on a real project. They don't generally get to do the technical drawings, again, because of liability issues and things of that nature, but they can contribute to the graphics and the diagrams that we use to help explain our designs. And we used to have a program. We've suspended it here recently. We just suspended it during COVID because it became so difficult, that we called LearnScape. And LearnScape was our way of giving back. The firm that I'm a partner in, all we do is education. So we focus on K-12 and higher education and some things a little bit adjacent. But our way to give back was every year we would have our emerging professionals design an outdoor classroom for a school in a school district somewhere. And then we would take a day off from the office, and all the architects and engineers and everybody else that works for us would go out to that district and build that outdoor classroom. So we would get donations from material suppliers. If there was a bunch of earthwork to do or something like that, we'd team up with a contractor and get somebody in to do, some of the big heavy lifting. But then the day of those builds, we would go out there and swing the hammers and operate the welders and do all those kind of fun things. And that program was fantastic because it allowed those emerging professionals to design something, to go through a real critique process of this doesn't fit the budget, or this is unbuildable, or the client just doesn't like the way this looks. And they had to come up with something that worked and functioned and everything else. And then they oversaw the construction. So they got that construction administration experience over the course of just a couple days.
And this
to
was
see
on a real project.
these are on real projects. Yeah. So there's a whole I want to say there's 10 of those projects out there. I led one of them one year, which was really quite fun to work with some young people and put together a project like that. That was the key. There was always one professional architect working with the group, kind of guiding them and making sure that they didn't fall off the rails, because that's really easy to do.
Yeah.
And the fun piece is, since nobody's paying you to do the job, right? The school district isn't paying for it. You don't have to worry as much about, I would say, the execution, but those projects, architects are pretty persnickety people. So they came out really good. They were all built really well. But yeah, LearnScape was the name of that series that we did. And our emerging professionals, it was a way for us to vet them too, right? These are kids that are 4th or 5th year in school. They are probably going to be applying for a job. We wound up hiring a number of them after that program. You're able to see who works well in a team, and you're able to see where they stand out in terms of their skill sets as well. This person is really good at design, or this person is really good at rendering things, or this person's really down in the details, versus, there's always that person on a team who just kind of rides the coattails.
Yeah.
And you get to see that too. So that's our emerging professionals. And then kind of the third level, when I came out of school, you would come out with a 5-year degree, and then you would start what was called the Intern Development Program, the IDP program, which was a national NCARB, which is National Council of Architectural Registration Boards, I think. Not I think, that's what it is. But you would start the IDP process, which was 3 years long of getting practical experience. But within that practical experience, there were different categories of experience, whether it was negotiating contracts, doing construction documents, doing schematic designing, programming, you name it. You had to have so many hours in each category before you could sit for your licensing exam. And this is the EPs that we have are paid. The interns straight out of school are paid. We don't call them interns anymore. We call them junior architects, which I think is a little more accurate, because you're really doing architecture work. You're not just an intern making copies or something like that. But that when I came out, we were called interns. It was a 3-year program. And at the end of that 3 years, if you had all the boxes checked, you could start sitting for your exams. Now they call it something else. There's an X in there somewhere, AXP, something like that. But similar in terms of you're trying to check off a bunch of boxes, but they actually allow you to sit for your exams right out of school. So as soon as you have your degree, you can start sitting for your exams, but you can't get your license until you've completed that 3-year period. Those interns, I'll throw up the air quotes, but those junior architects are paid architects. They're working professionally. They're using their degree, but each level brings with it a different level of oversight and what they're capable of doing. And the thing that I would share, whether you're hiring a high school kid for your home shop, or whether you're hiring someone for a little bit more corporate type thing, is the education that they get is incredibly valuable. If they come on board day one and they know the software that you're using, or they know how to use the table saw, or they know all the safety they've had, the safety, not just the lectures from the teacher, but the checkout, right? Like you passed all your safety courses, whatever that is, at the high school or community college level. That's huge, right? They come in and you don't have to teach them how to turn that crescent wrench. They come in and you can say, hey, set that up for 2 3/16 inch and, center that hole both directions. And, they should be able to go pull that drill press and nail it the first time if they have that kind of
So that
background.
brings me a question though, or a couple questions. So do you from them coming in with that level of experience, do you have to break bad habits? Because I have there is in Colorado here, there's community college, Red Rocks
Yeah.
Community College, and they have a pretty large, successful furniture design course or a program there. And I've been invited to come speak to them several times. And one thing I noticed is that the curriculum is taught more towards like the fine woodworking magazine crowd, is
Mm.
not is one-off pieces, but not necessarily how a professional would build it to make money. And so I get calls every year after graduation of someone, hey, I want to come work for you. And I don't want to hire them because I know the curriculum they've been taught is not how I do things. So do you have that problem where they have bad habits that you have to break, or maybe different ways of doing things that it's not going to fit your type of architecture?
Yeah, I would say there's a few things, and this goes beyond that right out of school level. Everybody that comes to us has a background, whether that's their educational background or whether it's a professional background. And everybody has processes that they're used to. And the same is true in woodworking, right? How you mill a board, how you cut a dovetail, or how you join a drawer box, right? Like there's so many decisions to make. Is it a dovetail, a finger joint, butts? Is it rabbited, all, is it doweled? All those things, right? You can make design choices on that. And again, if you're trying to make money, you're going to make decisions much more different than if you're trying to make a family heirloom, but you're not getting paid for the work. It's just something that you do after you get home from your 9 to 5 and you work on it for 3 years and then it's finally
Right.
done, right? There, you can't do that as a professional unless you're getting paid an awful lot of money, which there is that market out there too. But in terms of, I don't look at it as breaking bad habits. That we look at it, I should say, in terms of sharing our process with them and helping them to understand what that design process is. And architecture is weird because there is the design piece of it, but there's also a production piece of it, and then there's also a construction oversight piece of what we do. And each are very, very different skill sets. Some people are very strong in one area and weak in others. And there's a rare few that are strong all the way across the board. But our desire is to create that person who's strong in all those categories. So when somebody comes in, we interview them, like you would expect, right? We look at their portfolio. We ask them about the jobs that they have worked on and what role they played on the team and what that looked like. So when you see some great drawing in a portfolio, there's probably a dozen hands that have been on that drawing that are responsible for different things. So trying to understand what their experience really is. Yes, you worked on this building, but what piece of the building did you work on? What was your role? Were you the designer? Were you the detailer? Were you a person that went in and cleaned things up when the drawings got out of hand? Were you the client interface? All of those things. And then we take great pains in doing employee reviews every year. And it is a little bit of you do this well, you don't do this well, but it's where can we help you grow and how can we help you grow? Where do we see those opportunities for you to grow? And where do you think you're weak and need a little help? And weak's not a bad word because nobody comes out of the womb understanding how to design an entire building. I would tell you most people don't retire understanding how every nut and bolt goes into a building. They understand uh, large percentages of it, but there are still, I have no idea how to put together a skyscraper because I don't work on them. If you came into my office and said, "Can you design me a 40-story building?" I would say absolutely not. I would know where to start, but I wouldn't know how to finish. That's for certain. Could I be part of a team? Absolutely. But we also design in the education space. So when someone comes to us and they have a bunch of hospitality experience or retail experience or residential experience, but they don't understand education, then we have to fill that gap. Because in order to design the building and understand adjacencies and things of that nature for education, it's a very different thing than it is for some kind of a retail building. So I hope I'm answering your question,
Yeah,
Brian.
yeah, very
But
much so. And
but
generated
it's
another question.
but it's there is a lot of not habit breaking, but a lot of process orientation. So when we're working with a client and we're developing a program, we do it this way. When we're developing a conceptual and schematic design, we do it this way. When we're doing what's called design development, which is understanding kind of the color of every single wall, what flooring is going to go down, what type of material each thing is going to be made of. There's a piece of the process that is focused on that. And then construction documents is where we detail all the technical drawings. Understanding where where those deficiencies are, or where the differences in where their process might have been versus what our process is. And it takes us, as you get more senior, it takes longer to get someone up to speed. Someone who comes in at a senior architect level, easily it's going to take a year to get them up to speed. They come in knowing how to do a lot, but to get them to know as a senior, you have to know soup to nuts how to do the whole thing and lead a team to do the whole thing. So not only do you have to know it, you have to know how to lead a team who may have people on it that haven't seen the process before. When we bring young people on, they have no exposure to anything. So we have to teach them literally everything, but they're going to be focused on smaller pieces of the project. So we don't have to teach them the entire process at one time. We can focus in and say, we want you to do this right now. And then a couple months later, this is the next step. And a couple months later, that's the next step.
So yeah, in my area, there's no shop class in our high schools.
Right.
And last year, my daughter's going to an engineering school, chemical engineering school, and they had a group project that I hosted to help them build a contraption to compress their chemical polymer thing. And it became very apparent that even the kids that came from a school that had a shop class, they didn't actually take those classes because they didn't think they were important to the degree that they wanted to go in. And so it was very apparent that they were lacking those technical skills of how to drill holes and how to machine things and how to set up a CNC machine. They just didn't have that knowledge base, even if it was offered in their high school. How important do you think that is coming out of high school into an architecture firm, to have that kind of background, to know the experience of how it's actually going to be built in the field versus how it's going to be drawn on paper?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. And I was a big proponent of our LearnScape program when it was in its inception. And one of my big arguments was, well, not one of my big arguments, one of the things that I proposed was called the architect's test kitchen. And I proposed putting a room in our office that would have some small equipment in it, not huge woodworking stuff, but some small equipment where we could mock things up. So if you're going to be innovative as an architect, my belief is you have to be able to put your hands on it. You have to be able to iterate with it. You have to be able to develop said thing. When we're talking about building size components, you can't always put your head around those things. But when you look at some of the truly innovative firms out there, Morphosis comes to mind. Tom Main is an idol of mine in the world of architecture. They have a huge shop in their studio, and they have a place outside of their studio, a wall outside of their studio. You can look this up, where they have a bunch of Unistrut on there, and they can hang things from it. So they can make full-size building components and hang them on the outside of their building to get a feel for the scale and how it goes together. And that hands-on approach, even if it's not the actual architect making it, they're in the same room where the thing is being made. You can see through the glass at the end of the studio to the big CNC machines cutting things or doing things. And there's that connection of, oh, okay, if I do this, this is how they're going to do it in the field. I grew up, I did electrical work. My dad was an electrician. I always brag I was the highest paid kid in my high school. I was earning union scale as a senior in high school because I knew enough about hanging electrical conduit and running wires and wiring switches that my dad said, I can't hire anybody that can do more than you for this wage. So I'm just going to pay you union scale because you earn it. I also poured concrete. I framed houses. I drilled soil samples for a geotechnical company. And I learned to weld in college, freshman year of college. Was it freshman year of college? No, it was my senior year of high school. I bought my first welder, taught myself how to weld. So I have a fairly diverse background in making, all the way that goes all the way back to high school, and in commercial construction too, right? When I was working with my dad, I was not working residential projects. It was on commercial projects. We worked on a lot of banks, doing security systems and new lighting and things like that. That's where I learned the electrical trade. And having that on day one, when I walked in the office and I could talk intelligently about three-way and four-way switches and how that was going to affect, the way the wires went up and down the wall. I knew what MC cable was compared to conduit, just all those little things. It helps you communicate with all of your consultants, because we have, as architects, you don't design every component of that building. You have mechanical engineers that do the HVAC systems. You have electrical engineers that do electrical and controls, low voltage, networking, all those things. And then you have plumbing engineers that design the entire plumbing system. And there's even more engineers than that: structural engineers, civil engineers, you name it. There's probably 6 to 7 engineers for every architect that are on a project, on a design project. And you have to be able to communicate to each one of those engineers about their particular systems. So I have to understand what a VAV system is versus, I'm trying to think, we use so much VAV, but cassettes and other things, all the different conveyances that a mechanical system might have. I have to be able to speak intelligently. Is this a pneumatic control system, or is this an electric control system, or is this, something else? Do we have a BMS? All of those things you have to be able to speak intelligently about. And if you've been out in the real world and you can talk to people about how to frame something, how a header goes together with jack studs and king studs and all of those things, it makes you much better at your job. Can you do your job without that? You can, but it's much more difficult. And especially when you get to construction administration, which is where we oversee what's happening. If you go up and start talking to a framer and you can't speak their language, and I don't mean English versus Spanish, I mean, talk specifically about you're using light gauge studs instead of heavy gauge studs on this, and this is a load bearing wall. Why are we doing this? Can you use a hat channel here to fur out this wall to make it level and plumb, because it looks like X, Y, or Z didn't get installed that way, and I've got tile that's going in on the other side of this wall that has to be straight and true, or it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. Those types of things you have to be able to talk about. Concrete, how you finish concrete. Do I want you to just burn the absolute bejesus out of it, or do I want you to finish it to a textured finish, or what is it? Those things become very important. I know I'll kind of end it here. On the welding side of things, I am the in-house expert on welding. Can you weld stainless to mild steel? If I want a railing that's painted or a railing that's stainless steel, but it's going to go on a painted piece of structure, heavy red iron, can you do that? The answer is yes. But most people don't know that. And a lot of commercial welders only do one thing. They don't do stainless and mild steel. They, one or the other.
Specialize in a thing.
And but even how do you grind a weld? And I don't mean how do you operate the machine, but how do you tell somebody the level of grind? Is it okay to leave a little bird shit behind? Or do you want it ground smooth? Do you want it ground to a mirror polish? How do you tell somebody that so that they bid the project accordingly and you're not going out there asking them to clean up work that they can't afford to do because they didn't bid it properly? Those things are very important as a designer. Can you get by without them? Absolutely. There's tons of people in my office that have never done a lick of construction work, and that's okay. But I would tell you the people who have are much more informed, and they have a much easier time at certain things.
Yeah. So to piggyback on that from the other end, I'm often the guy that answers the phone when someone in your office calls, not necessarily your office, but
Yeah.
like an interior design office. And this is more in the bigger the firm, the bigger the issue it becomes. But like I'll oftentimes the interior designer will tell their intern or their new assistant that doesn't have a lot of experience, oh, we need quotes for these shelvings or this bed or whatever. And so they'll call me and I'll be like, okay, well, how much weight does it need to hold? And they don't know. So they didn't know to ask the questions, and so I'm not mad at the intern that's calling me asking me to
Yeah.
bid something without all the information. I'm kind of irritated that the interior designer didn't coach them up and say, all right, this is what you need to tell them. We want it made out of this material. We want it, this color. We want it to be able to hold this amount of weight. Like they need to give the intern enough information so that way it's not a whole back and forth thing.
Yeah, there's interesting things, and I could go on about this for hours at a time, but we have very detailed specifications on everything that goes into our buildings, and some of that is a byproduct of just being a large commercial firm, and we have to have those things. We have to be able to communicate exactly what it is that we
Yeah.
need you to do, and when it comes to any of our casework or anything like that, we have varying levels of specification based on, is this a light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, or super heavy duty? And everything from the knobs and pulls to the hinges, to the drawer slides, to the construction. How thick is the plywood that goes on the outside of this case? Is it a veneered plywood? Is it a structural plywood? Is it, can it be press board of any kind? And depending on the application, again, is it light all the way up to heavy duty? Those specifications change, and it's very easy for us to send those out to somebody bidding. Hey, what is this? We've actually got I think it's the APWA maybe, or there's another one. There's the American Plywood Institute, and then APWI, sorry. American Plywood Institute, and then there's another group that governs commercial casework, and they actually just have catalog numbers for what it is that you are asking for, and it's very specific. This is a laminate covered thing with 4 shelves that's 16 inches, well, it wouldn't be 16 inches wide, 15 inches wide by 30 inches tall, and all of these things. But anyway, yes, there's a lot of detail that you have to know to be able to answer those questions intelligently.
Yeah. On the residential side, it's a little more Wild West out here.
Yes.
But yeah, not quite nearly as detailed in that. So now I kind of want to go back a little bit because
Yeah, sure.
you said that to get your architect's license, you have to do a 3-year internship in the office to
Yeah.
learn all the different levels and put so many hours into different levels. Do you think they should change that requirement to include more on-site work, or is there even an on-site work requirement to
So,
where you
yeah.
can actually have your person go out and swing a hammer and frame a thing or
Oh,
pull wire for electrician or something to get them on the job site to physically do the deed?
Yeah, there is no requirement for any hammer swinging or any construction of any kind. There is a requirement for construction observation. And I don't know what the hours are, but you have to spend X number of hours on site seeing things. They don't say you need to be there when they're pouring concrete, or you need to be there when they're raising steel, or not raising steel, erecting steel, raising precast panels, doing any of those things. There's no requirement for what type of work you have to observe or anything like that, but you do have to participate in construction administration, which is generally, I'm going to say old man, but it's no longer old man, old person. The older you get in the world of architecture, the better you are at construction administration, just because you've seen it over and over and you understand the nuance and the detail involved in observing different job sites. But even as a young person, you're going to pick up an awful lot being on a job site for, I don't know, I want to say it's probably a few hundred hours is what they require on job sites.
Yeah.
So
But there's no specific, all right, you need to take notes or report back. They just have to be there. So it's kind of up to them whether they're going to participate or stand there and sip a cup of coffee.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the thing I would say, and this doesn't exactly go along with your question, but is part of it. The 3 year mark, I would say, is maybe you're still kind of a freshman at the 3 year mark. Like, that's not a lot of experience to be licensed and able to put your stamp on any building, right? It would be foolish to just go out and start stamping things, or telling people that you could do anything. But we all go through, I always look at like sophomore or freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior, right? Like, we all go through those phases in life with whatever it is that we're doing, whether that's making things, building things, designing things, learning to play instruments, whatever. And it's really weird. I was a Latin scholar in high school. So sophomore is short for sophus moron, which is the wise fool. And after that 3 year freshman period, you are in your sophomore phase. And the wise fool refers to the fact that you've seen enough to know something. The foolish part is you think you know everything, and you know relatively nothing. And when you look at, you know, we always used to say freshmen don't know, but they know that they don't know. Sophomores don't know, but they think they know. Juniors know, but they don't know that they know. And seniors know, and they know, right? Like, that's how I look at that whole progression through our industry and our career. And so that sophomore is really dangerous. And that's the point at which you can get licensed. And you know enough to think that you know some things, but you really don't know enough to do what you need to do. And maybe 5 more years of experience. Now you have enough experience to say, ooh, I don't know anything. And you actually do know something, and you're capable of an awful lot. But if you would ask somebody 3 to 5 years into their career versus 10 years into their career how much they know, 3 to 5 years is going to say, I know a lot. I really got this down. And the 10 year is going to say, I don't know anything. And so, yeah, strangely enough, even though you're licensed, it is relatively accepted that you should not just go out and practice on your own at that 3 year mark.
Yeah.
That's a really bad idea.
Yeah. I was just doing some math on my phone while you were telling your story to give you a kind of a relatable story on the contractor side of things. I started in the trades when I was 13, and by the time I was 26, so about 13 years later, 27-ish area, was when I got my first job as a project manager. And going from 13 years of experience of working in the field of helping frame houses and helping do whatever, all the worked in all kinds of different trades. I thought I knew a lot, and
Yeah.
I did, but I did not know a lot about managing people. So that first year was an absolute train wreck for me, trying to figure out how to manage people, how to manage subcontractors. I got walked over many times, and then then there's times where I felt like I was starting to get walked over. So I stood up for myself and maybe pushed too hard and went too far over the other direction. So that sometimes, yeah, you just got to get in there and just know that first year is going to be a train wreck.
Oh yeah. And gosh, I had a conversation with one of our architects the other day, and he made a comment about um, sometimes we believe in our younger people more than they believe in themselves. And it's because we see them, right? Like my job is to stand back and be the lifeguard. And when somebody starts to go under, yank them up and say, okay, I can see you're drowning. Let me help you. And the amount of time that it takes to understand at that level, that you're getting into the twilight of your career, right? I just turned 50, so I'm having some of those thoughts now. But you've got to have people around you who are going to save you from getting into the train wreck, hopefully. Some companies just let people go, just rev them up and let them go, and it's like, oh, that's a huge mistake. But gosh, the management and people side of things, back coming full circle back to our interns, you go from being the doer to being, in some respects, the manager slash doer when you bring your first employee on. And that human resource management is an incredibly difficult thing that no one can teach you. There's no textbook for it because every person is different. Every person's an
Right.
individual. And I got my crash course in it. I worked in big rock and roll, doing rock and roll shows, and we would show up in a different city every day and have to put together an entire stage lighting and audio rig in a matter of 4 hours with people that we had never met in a venue that we'd never stepped foot in. And you learn really quick that you can't bully people because they'll stop working for you, that respect generally gets respect, and that, there's always going to be somebody that you can't work with, and you've got to figure out, or who doesn't want to work with you. And you've got to figure out very quickly either how to isolate that person and keep them from stalling everyone else out, or how to isolate them and give them a different task that they can take on their own and have some ownership of. And that's generally what they want. And I learned that one of the most important lessons I learned in life was during that era. And I learned that the most valuable thing to any human being is their name. And if you can remember everybody's name and call them by their name, they respect you a lot faster because you took the time to make sure you knew their name. And like I said, I'd work with 15 to 20 different people every day. And the first thing we would do is have everybody introduce themselves. And I would sit and mentally play the name game with everybody. And most of the time I could get a dozen out of 15
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
regularly.
That's impressive. I am terrible with names. I really struggle to remember people's names.
I I do too, and that's why you'd go down the line, and the first guy would be Clark, and then Jim. Okay, Clark, Jim. Okay, Clark, Jim, Andy. Clark, Jim, Andy. And I would sit and repeat it, and as they would start walking away and breaking up, I would sit and I would literally repeat their names in my head all day long, so that I would hopefully get them right. And sometimes I would say the wrong name. It happens to all of us, right? Like we're human beings. We can't keep it
Yeah.
all straight. But I had people on many, many occasions come up and tell me, we think it's really cool that you learned our name, and took the time to learn our name. I said, I find that number one, people value that. And you have to build that respect, which generally with some people can take a year to build working relationship with. You have to build it in about 5 minutes. And how do you do that? And that was one of the number one pieces. And again, it's not like a trick or a parlor thing or anything else. It's, I want to show these guys my respect, and that's how I do it. That's how you can do it. Number one, you respect their talent. If they tell you I'm a high steel rigger and I'm really good at doing this, then guess what? You're going to be my high steel guy today. Or I I've been working on, wire and audio systems for 15 years. Okay, great. There's the box of wires right there. Here's all the speakers. I need them stacked 10 high. And if you could just wire them in parallel, that'd be great. And then you can watch their face. And if they understood every word you say, they'd be like, yeah, whatever. Okay, I'll be right back in an hour and it'll all be done. If they kind of wrinkled up at some point, okay, I don't want to insult your intelligence here, but can I step through what I just said and what that meant? And usually, like I said, if their face is wrinkled up a little bit, they were looking for that help. Well, why don't we do this first? Let's stack the speakers up and then we'll get to the wiring. And when you get them all stacked, come grab me and we'll go through that next step. But uh, interest, interesting dynamic because Lord knows the show's got to go on, right?
Right.
At 8 o'clock, those doors are going to pop open and everybody's going to expect to see a big rock and roll show, and you cannot disappoint them. And even more so at 1 o'clock, the first band is going to be on stage for sound check, and you can't disappoint them either. So there were some intermediate deadlines that we had, as well as the overall doors popping open deadline. So anyway, that's a good way to figure out your worth.
Yeah.
Doing work like that.
Yeah. So to kind of circle back to your, you don't want to insult anybody. You have to make some assumptions that they know what they're doing, but you still have to be able to verify that they understand that your level of expectation, what that assumption is. Like, to give an example of that, in back to the residential design work, like some architects in the residential design will draw in certain blocking, like where they want the hand towel to be mounted or whatever.
Yeah.
Some architects just assume that the interior designer is going to figure all that out because she's going to spec, or I should say, he, predominantly female in the interior design world. But they're going to spec out where they want it to go, and then when I come in to actually install it, I'm assuming that there's something back there, but oftentimes there's not. So, like where did that fall apart? Like, is that even the expectation? Like in some houses, like your cookie cutter houses, there's no blocking of any kind in there except for
Yeah.
the bare minimum fire blocking. In high end things, I've been in houses where they've skinned the whole wall with a sheet of plywood and then put the drywall up, because that way you can hang whatever you want on that wall. Um, Different expectations for different clients, for different people, and each person's making an assumption that it's just the other guy's going to take care of it, or they want to detail it out exactly where they want it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one that, my goodness, we hang all kinds of technology on walls and everything else. And do you drop it into a specification where it's a sentence in a 1,000-page document that says anywhere, contractor needs to coordinate locations for all mounted pieces of hardware shown on plans?
Yeah.
Or do you back up in your interior elevations and show the limits of all the blocking? Done it both ways.
Yeah.
But that's definitely, yeah, when you're getting into the big commercial game, those are big questions. One of my favorite ones that I still don't understand, the engineers fight over who's gonna take the column bases for parking lot lighting. That is an age-old argument that civil engineers, electrical engineers, and is there one more in there? Structural engineers
So
argue
explain
about.
to me what that is. I don't know what that is.
So you've seen parking lot lights,
Uh-huh.
and they have generally a concrete column that they sit on so that if somebody runs into it, they run into concrete and not
Uh-huh.
into the light, right?
Right.
So there's that base. That's a structural component, but it's outside of the building. So it's really a civil component, but the civil engineer is not a structural engineer. But then the electrical engineer, there's a conduit that goes down through the center of that column. And sometimes there's even a big grounding rod that goes through there. So there's a component of it that needs to be electrically designed, and it needs to be coordinated with the base of their electrical light fixture. So whose job is that? And I can tell you who winds up doing it 3/4 of the time is the architect, who has no business in that arena, designing a structural column with electrical going through it out in the middle of a
Parking lot.
parking lot.
So you think they would have like standards, like standard A has the ground rod, standard B does not have the ground rod, and then you can just plug them in, just drop them
Yeah.
wherever.
Yep. But the problem is somebody has to take responsibility and liability for that design, and everybody wants to back up. So
Right.
there
If
there
someone
are
hits it and the light bulb comes down, who's getting sued?
yeah, that
Yeah.
so I've got a list of a couple dozen items that we discuss on day one of any design project over who's going to do what. Who has blocking? That's always one of them. Who's going to pick up owner related equipment? Who's going to do the light poles in the parking lot? Who's responsible for handrails? Uh, Handrails are a structural element, but they're also an architectural element. So kind of fun. All those
Yeah.
little details.
Yeah. The design, if you want a nice looking design on your handrail, but it's still got to meet code.
Yeah, still got a. Is it 100 pounds per foot lateral force load? It's pretty significant
Yeah.
load that it has to hold up to. Well, I'm looking at the clock, Brian. We've been on here a little over an hour. I don't know if there's anything we want to add about adding our first employee or first intern to our shop, kind of what the hurdles are with some of that.
I think we pretty much covered the basics. You wanna take us out?
Yeah. I'm Greg Porter. You can catch me. My social medias are Greg's Garage on YouTube and Instagram. Also, Skyscraper Guitars on YouTube and Instagram as well.
And I'm Brian Benham. You can find me pretty much anywhere under Brian Benham or Benham_design. And you are listening to the Maker's Quest podcast. If you want to check out any of our past episodes, go to themakersquest.com. Thanks for listening.